I'm Whitney.
I'm Mindy.
And I'm Deb.
We're three best friends who love nerdy things.
Well, some people think we're nerdy, but we think we're pretty awesome.
This is our nerdiest thing.
This season, we are discussing A Court of Thorns and Roses and all of Sarah J. Maas's books. We are spoiler friendly, so listen at your own risk. Hello, fellow nerds, and welcome to our nerdiest thing. Today, we are talking about chapters 18 and 19 of A Court of Thorns and Roses, and I have a lot to say today, and some of it may be some hot takes. But first, Mindy, will you do our nerdiest vocabulary?
Sure. So today I've got two words, and one of them is actually sort of a precursor to next chapter because it's brought up in this chapter, but we really don't get into it until the next couple of chapters. And it is the Fire Festival or Fire Day. Crap, now I don't even know what it's called.
I'm thinking Fire Fest.
I did too.
Where they all went down for their exclusive meals and it was cheese on bread.
Yeah.
It's
Fire Night.
Fire Night. Thank you. I thought it was something different than it was. And I think Deb did too. I thought it was Callan Mai. It's actually Callan May.
Because a Mai Tai is M-A-I.
I know,
I thought it was Callan Mai too, actually.
It's Callan May because it's actually based on like a May Day.
That's stupid.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell
Not
you right
May
now.
Day. That's not stupid. Please don't
When
think
we
that.
talk about it next week, I will
You will
probably
most certainly call it
Callan Mai.
I'll
Yeah.
probably do
time.
both and sound like a
A May
complete
Day
idiot.
isn't spelled M-A-Y?
No, it is, but this is like a different language. Like it's an ancient language.
It's Fey, Debra.
Sorry.
No, but like in real life, there really is
Let
a
me
Callan
pull out
May.
my Fey dictionary.
I thought you were going to say Fey Dick.
Well, no, but one of those too. Why do you guys always get me to talk about dicks in the first 3 minutes? My husband's texting me as he's editing those going, so what act did Jamie do to Claire that you want me to do to you? And I had no idea what he was talking about. So
All of them?
Well, it was the pricking of our thumbs, the beginning of that episode where he's downtown and doesn't stop. And I had to reiterate to my husband, I was like, we do that. I just wanted you to do it right then. So.
Well, let it be known that I started that conversation this time. So the other word is the terrifying figure we meet at the end of the last chapter that we read for this week. And it is, I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory, but it's the adder. And it's just, the wiki says it's just like that adder.
I'm glad I've been pronouncing that correctly.
Because I mean,
in my
what
head.
I too.
Yeah.
A tour.
A tour.
We were at a bookstore, my daughter and I, and we were talking to this girl. We were like by the book talk table, and someone had picked up Kingdom of Ash, and I was asking her if she had read those books, and she kept calling Manon.
That's actually how you say it.
No, I can't do it.
I was going to say, after you told us that story last week or a couple weeks ago, whenever you told
It's
us
Manon.
that. Well, I've been getting TikTok videos of Throne of Glass stuff, and it's like audiobook clips, and the narrator says,
well, it
Manon.
just sounds so pretentious.
Yeah.
Well, it definitely does. But I will say it's because I am a French nerd because I took French for 7 years.
Yeah.
And how
many times did you flunk it? How many of that
Girl,
was French
I was
one?
top of my class. I actually took 2 French classes my senior year. So technically I've had 8 French classes. And I started taking in college, but then I was like, fuck this shit. It was boring.
That whole book's in French. I don't want to do that.
Exactly. But it is a popular French
We
name.
do
and that's
have
how they say
listeners
it.
from France. I don't know if I've told you guys that or yet, but
No, it's not that I don't love French. I actually enjoy it, but I'm made 2 of my kids take it so I could help them with it, and I really enjoy it. Okay, this might be my nerdiest thing. I really wanted to help my son with his
My
French
daughter-
project this week.
It's pretty
my
great.
daughter wanted to take Latin this year, and I was like, no. And she's like, why? I was like, what job application are you going to list that you took Latin
Robbie
for?
took Latin in college because it didn't have a lab hour, and he thought it would be easier.
What did you do in
Lab.
language lab?
It was like extra assignments. It was like homework.
So why
study
don't they
hour,
just call
basically.
it homework?
Yeah.
Hey,
Just give
I'm
them
going to come in here and dissect a creme brulee. Like, what are they doing? Why do they call it lab?
No.
So for our French listeners, though, I do think French is a very beautiful language, and
Very
I love
well.
it, and
Oui, oui.
I really enjoy it. But I just was not very good at it once I got into college. So
Well,
there's that.
I'm going to keep calling it Callan Mai. Sorry.
Callan Mai.
I feel like that's maybe
I'm a
like
word
offensive.
nerd. I'm a word nerd, and I'm going to call it what it's supposed to be pronounced. So I'm just going to sound like the outsider.
I'll pronounce it some ways Mindy's way and some ways Whitney's way.
Go half and half.
Depending on who you're looking
Who
at.
said it last. Yeah.
Let's be clear, Mindy's way is the correct way, and Whitney's way is not.
And Debra's way is the Spanglish of the word.
Well, let's do our nerdiest recap, and we're going high tech this week. Mindy has some kind of app spin wheel on her phone instead of just drawing a name from a slip of paper.
It's so fancy. Look.
It is. I mean, it really is. We're moving up in the world.
All right, so here we go. I'm going to tap to spin.
If it's me, I'm going to be really bad.
I'm cramming right now.
I'm going to be
staring
really
the
bad
notes
at
in my
this.
book.
Oh, it's definitely going to be me.
You've done it a ton.
Again.
Mindy, Jet.
I'm ready, though.
Go for it.
I'm ready. Okay, so we go on a fancy spring court field trip to this glen, and then Feyre and Tamlin skinny dip in Starlight, which in my mind looks like the unicorn blood from Harry Potter. And then he takes her to the gallery. She gets all into the art. She paints and paints and paints. They get closer and closer. They talk about things. And then the adder shows up and makes me want to piss my pants. So I'm sure she wanted to piss her pants too. And peace out.
That was really good. You had 3 seconds to spare.
I'm sure I skipped a bajillion things.
You did way better than I was going to. It was going to be like they went to a glen. She took off her shirt. Some other stuff happened. I can't remember.
No, it's not nothing else would have happened. You're really good at like description, so you'd have been like, her shirt had ruffles at the bottom with pink top stitching around
And
the
that
collar.
was all we were going to get.
It's like for all the stuff that I remember from all these books, I cannot do the recaps at all. Like I'm not good at that.
It's like Deb and I only remember what we just read, so it works for us. But you are remembering like all the
Too
volumes.
much.
And then they went to war and they cut off the king of Hybern's head.
Yeah.
Chapter 20.
Well, so let's talk about the Glen, because that I feel like I have a lot to say about the Glen. There was a lot going on with that scene, both the action that was happening, even though it wasn't super action packed. There's a lot going on with what they're thinking and how Feyre is feeling and what like Lucian is doing.
I feel like we learn a lot of backstory from all the characters in these chapters.
Especially Tamlin. There's some light shed, I feel like, on his character, but also I feel like I have a lot more questions after the scene in the Glen than I actually have answers to.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed reading this scene because I had remembered the basic gist of like Tamlin brings her to a place that's really important to him, but I had not remembered Lucian being so funny. Like I thought it was genuinely funny how he was like
the creepy chaperone.
Well, he was very obviously like telling Tamlin what to do.
Yes.
And I loved how Tamlin's like, would you like to sit with us on this blanket? And she's like, no, I want to feel the grass. And there's like hushed whispers behind, like furiously whispering. And
what do I do? Damn it.
I know Lucian is like, go sit with her, you idiot. Like, it's just so funny to me.
So the part that I thought was really funny was when it said a cork popped, followed by the sounds of Lucian chugging the bottle's contents and chuckling with a murmured brushed. And I said, is Lucian based off of Debra? That's what I wrote in my book.
I
I had
liked that
completely
too.
forgotten this scene, which is weird. I don't know.
See, I remembered like I said, I remembered the gist of it, but I didn't remember some of the specifics at all.
Yeah.
So Tamlin invites her to go to this Glen, and while they're there, you know, Lucian is very much telling Tamlin, here's how you play this, right? Because we're still operating under Amarantha's curse. And if as a first-time reader, you do not know that. As Feyre, you do not know that. But if you're not a first-time reader, you know Tamlin is trying to break this curse, right? And he needs Feyre to fall in love with him. However, knowing that that's his motivation, I still found Tamlin in this scene in the Glen to be super endearing and really sweet.
I did too, and I'm going to call myself out. Mindy told me she was going to be pro Tamlin this episode, and I told her I was going to glare at her a lot. And I did. I will say he is very endearing. And I've said a million times, there's a reason that you do really like him.
Yeah.
I mean, he is. Like, you know, he's trying hard, and, you know, he just... later isn't his best. Can I point out something before we talk more about Tamlin? Because I'm going to point this out every time I see it now. So whenever at the beginning of the chapter, when they get to the Glen, they talk about how they're at the top of a grassy knoll overlooking a glade of oaks so wide and so high they could have been the pillars and spires of an ancient castle. And I want to point out that this is something that we continue to see in all 3 series of things being shaped as, you know, the castle and these old temples and sanctuaries. And so I just wrote in my book over here, because I think, you know, I'm going to say this every episode. I don't think all 3 worlds are on the same timeline, and I find it really interesting that this has come up more than once. And
It's
we're
interesting.
only 20 chapters in.
Since you've brought that up, I notice those things much more
Me
now
too.
as well. Like it's like, oh yeah, it's almost like I'm trained now to look for that.
Well, and I mean, there is the self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Where if you're looking for something, it's probably going to be there. So I mean,
Right.
Again, because I'm sure Sarah J. Maas listens to this podcast every week. But, you know, at some point, I'm sure I'm going to have to say, yeah, I was looking for something. Or I'm going to say, you know what? You guys should have listened to us way back when, because we knew that was going to happen.
Yep.
Yeah. I hope you're right, because I really like your theory.
I do too.
And every time you point something out like that, I'm like, I think she's right, guys. I think she's right.
Oh my God. Whitney's never told me one of my theories is right before.
It makes sense, though.
Okay, so have we talked about on the podcast about your PowerPoint that you did for
This is such a great story.
So last year, the 3 of us and another one of our friends, Holly, we did a reading party when The War of Two Queens by Jennifer Armentrout came out, and we went to a hotel to read for the weekend. And we're actually doing that again soon. So having said that, Whitney asked if she could make a PowerPoint with all of the theories that had already been made as we went into this new book. A Shadow in the Ember had just come out, and so we had just read that, and there was a lot going on in the fandom, and we were like, yeah, sure. And so she's joking about how long it is, and you know, she's put a lot of effort into it. And no shit, we ordered Mexican food, and she's like, I'll eat when I'm done with my presentation. Whitney got food poisoning because her food sat there for 2.5 hours. 2.5 hour presentation on From Blood and Ash. And whenever she had already finished the book, she didn't change her presentation, even though she knew some stuff was wrong. But every time I would look at her and go, that can't be right, she would just like pointedly give me a look across the room. Like, don't interrupt my presentation, Debra.
And Deborah was adamant that Sarah was not the consort. And she
Yeah.
kept saying, is she though? Is she though? And Whitney was like, we'll get to that. She was such a teacher.
I will say now, I can talk about this more in our Nerdiest Thing of the Week next week, but I'm re-listening to Shadow in the Ember right now, and I'm like, okay, I really wish I had read Shadow in the Ember after The War of Two Queens. I like it more that way.
Me too.
know.
I'm excited to reread it
Yeah.
before A Light in the Flame.
I know. I have a lot of reading I need to do between now and forever, I guess. My TBR list is just always going to be long.
I was texting with Whit last night about a book I wanted her to read, and I was like, and when you're done with that, here's this person's other series, and then when you're done with that, I want you to read this book.
Deborah knows not to do that to me because I'm like, I can't.
It's too
I
much.
can't.
Well, I want to mention something. When Tamlin invites Feyre to go to the Glen, I wrote down in my notes, is this the she's all that effect? And I want to explain that because I wrote it several times in my notes for these 2 chapters. So Tamlin invites her to go for a ride, right? I want to take you somewhere special. Like, you'll see, come with me. But she says that he has sorrow in his eyes when he's talking to her. And so Feyre is thinking that the sorrow in Tamlin's eyes is because of all of the death that they have had around them lately, with the killing the Naga, with the fairy who had lost his wings. And she thinks he is feeling sorrow for her having to experience that. But I wrote down, this is what I think the she's all that effect is. Is he actually experiencing sorrow because he feels bad for using her? Because, like we've said multiple times in this episode and others, he is being motivated by the necessity of her falling in love with him to break this curse.
Okay, I've seen She's All That a million times, so I want to fill in the viewership or listenership of our of our podcast. So in that movie, Freddie Prinze Jr. has made a bet to take any girl that he's chosen for him and make her prom queen after he's dumped on his ass after spring break. And he chooses the very quirky Rachel Lee Cook, and she's an art student and really like not honestly that quirky if I'm going to be
not
quite
unattractive at all.
She's
Right.
a beautiful girl who wears glasses.
Yeah.
in a
basically
painter's apron.
Yeah.
And he starts to have feelings for her and starts to feel guilty and has a lot of anguished looks across the cafeteria at her. It's really cute. If you've not seen it, you should. It's a really cute movie.
But yeah, it's one of those tropes, I guess, that you've seen in a lot of movies or read in a lot of books of like, it didn't start out that way. I never planned on falling in love with you. Like one of those kinds of things.
Like Shadow in the Ember.
Right.
Like, right now.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And I feel like, I just wonder, is that what Tamlin is thinking? Right. Like he is starting, we've talked, in previous episodes, he's starting to open himself up to the possibility of him actually falling for Feyre, right? Like not just her falling in love with him.
Can I say something though? Like, I guess my question back to you would be, why do we think that? Because I don't feel very much remorse from him ever in any situation. And maybe I'm incorrect because I can't remember for shit, but like he doesn't really ever show remorse for anything that happens to her under the mountain or anything, does he? He doesn't seem like a real remorseful guy.
I think that he does show remorse in some circumstances. But I think it's very arguable what he's feeling remorse for. So like, for example, in book 2, when she's telling Tamlin, like, you have got to give me some space and stop like she didn't say trapping because he hadn't done that yet. Stop telling me to stay in the house. Stop making me go with Ianthe. Like, I want to do stuff with you. Involve me. And he gets really upset and his power like shatters the study or whatever. And she kind of subconsciously protects herself with her new powers. And I think in that situation, he realizes that he lost control, and he's like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry in that situation. However, that's what I mean by arguable
but
about.
He doesn't feel guilty about what he's doing to her. He's sorry that he almost like physically hurt her.
That's what I'm saying about it's arguable. What does he feel? He's
like
showing
I'm
remorse.
sorry I got caught.
Well,
What I
I think physical he's definitely a I hate to say this, but a black and white kind of guy. When he can see the danger, I think he reacts differently. I mean, he locks her up because he's worried about her. We've talked about that. It doesn't make it excusable, but he does. So like maybe because he could see it happening there, because I don't feel like he ever feels remorseful for anything like mentally.
I don't think he's capable of that. And I'll get to that later too. I think there's a lot that was revealed to me in this chapter about his upbringing and how he came into being a High Lord. And, he's thrown into that. Like, basically, he was brought up in this boot camp. He was raised by, a war band, and that's how he was brought up. And then he's thrown into this High Lordship, which is not at all like he has none of the social graces, which we've already talked about. He has zero swag. He has no like diplomacy. That's why he hires Lucian or makes Lucian his emissary. And it's almost like sending like saying when you're thrust into that role, would you send somebody who's trained to be a chef into a surgery room? Like that's sort of like I just don't think he's I really don't think he's capable of people, like that's how he just thinks. He's like, okay, I got to do what I got to do with the best that what I've been given.
Okay, that's a good point.
I kind of think of Tamlin in the same, I feel like this is going to sound horrible, but it's the truth. I think of Tamlin in the same kind of category as I think about people in the like true crime kind of stories where you learn about the background of some of these people who have done such horrible things. And it's like, well, this this dude didn't even have a chance.
Like, no wonder they turned out screwed
Right.
up.
But it doesn't excuse any of the things that they have done. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's
Like, you
well,
can...
it's more like, sure, they ended up messed up, but like
Right.
a lot of people
Right.
also went through the same thing and aren't messed up.
Exactly.
But
It's
you
what
can
you have to
understand
do about
how
it.
they got there.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Right?
That's
It's an
kind of
understanding, not a forgiving.
Yes, that's kind of how I view Tamlin. And that's what I feel like I've not done a super great job trying to articulate how I feel about Tamlin, because I know I've said I'm a Tamlin apologist and then I've said I'm not a Tamlin apologist. But I feel like I want to look at all of these characters in like a complete way, you know? And I feel like Tamlin, as well as Nesta, they're the two characters I feel like that are just completely vilified by the fandom, and all of the other facets of their characters are ignored, you know?
Right, yeah,
and
yeah.
I am like, well, no, let's look at them as a whole, because that's how she wrote them, right? She did not write anybody in this series as complete
Yeah.
villain or complete savior, right?
So is there any, and this makes me think of this, when we get to Under the Mountain with Amarantha, because I don't remember how much we learn about her backstory, or why she's just
I don't think a
fucking
ton.
insane.
Yeah, I don't think a
so.
ton.
It's like, that's a backstory I would be interested in hearing, right? Because she is a character that I feel like probably on purpose has zero redeeming qualities, right? King of Hybern, zero redeeming qualities, because honestly, you don't want redeeming qualities in a villain,
Right.
Right.
Well, maybe
But-
that's why we don't get their backstory, so that we don't feel that way towards
Well,
them.
sure. And that's, I've said this before. That's why I don't want a redemption arc
Yeah.
for Tamlin. Like, well, this is what he was feeling at the time, because then it changes the whole way I feel about the series.
And see, I don't think he needs a redemption arc, because we get the stuff that we get in book one.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It wouldn't
Yeah.
be horrible to watch him learn how to love someone better than he loved Feyre. That
Yes.
wouldn't
Yes.
be
I totally agree with
horrible,
that.
right? But like,
Yeah.
I don't want a revisit of like, this is why he did all the shitty things he
Oh,
did.
no.
And I don't think that would happen.
I think it's one thing. Growth is different than redemption. You know, redemption, I feel like you're almost forgiving some of the stuff, like the backstory and all that. Growth is taking that backstory and rewriting your narrative, you know, and so, which he didn't. Like we said, other people would take what he was given and do something completely different with it, in a more positive way.
Or more negative too.
Oh, exactly. But your case in point too is that, everybody, Feyre's beloved, but I'll be honest, when I'm reading these chapters, she's kind of a brat. Like,
well, and same with Rhysand,
Yeah.
right? Like, I mean, obviously he's like a good guy in our story, right? Like, he's Feyre's spoiler alert, he's Feyre's mate. he saves her in a lot of ways, but there's also, I feel like, a very small percentage of the fandom who are like, can we talk about Under the Mountain for a second? And he does some really messed up stuff, of which I actually noted a couple of things, and we can talk about it when we get there in these chapters of like, is this really different than
if there's
what
something
Rhys
to be
did?
said for intention,
Right. Yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, yeah, you're right. And I'm excited to get to Under the Mountain. And actually, in the show notes for this week, I wrote to Whitney, I'm like, I don't have a particular topic because where is Rhysand? God,
I know,
this
right?
is taking
Like-
forever. But I mean, I'm really, really enjoying doing this deep dive because I have never really paid that much attention to these beginning chapters. And I
Right.
hate to say that as someone who's a fan, but I want to talk more about that as we get to it, because I mean, Rhys does some super messed
Right.
up stuff.
And we know why,
Right.
but it doesn't change what he did, you know?
Right. And I mean, he continues to do messed up stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And he knows it too. I did want to note a couple of things from the Glen scene that made me think of book 2 when Feyre's in the night court. So first of all, when they get to the Glen and she looks around and sees where they've taken her, she says that it's the most beautiful place that she'd been to, which is exactly what she says when she goes to Valaris in book 2. She says it's the most beautiful place that she's ever seen, much like how we're going to see next week. She says Rhysand is the most beautiful man she's ever seen. I just thought that was interesting. And then she talks about this pool of liquid starlight, which obviously the starlight is connected to Night Court. I actually tried to do a deep dive on liquid starlight and could not find hardly anything except for like a video game.
I wanted to do that too. It's funny that you say that because I did write and for the record, I don't write in books typically. I'm writing in a used copy of this book for the podcast. So when I say that, I want you guys to think I'm a monster.
I'm a monster. I write in my books.
I tab my books, but I wrote, where did they get this? And she even asks, and he's like, I don't know. And it makes me wonder if like his dad did something through all of that.
That made me think of Night Court stuff too in book 2, because when Feyre first goes to the Night Court and Rhys takes her to the palace above the Court of Nightmares on the mountain, she says, why is your house set up in a super cold place if it's going to be kept warm anyway? She asks him a couple of questions in Valaris, kind of the same deal of like, why is it set up this way? And he's like, I don't know. Somebody else did it a long time ago. I didn't ask nobody told me why. And it made me think the same kind of question for Tamlin of like, how many High Lords have these weird like mysteries in all of their court? Like, do they all have these weird things in their court where they're like, I have no idea what that thing's about?
Expansive land, right? It's like almost like I know there's an addition on my house. I'm like, I don't know, it's just there. It's kind of cool. We're sitting in it right now for the record.
I didn't ask anybody.
There's not something supernatural in it though. If that was the case, I might be like, I think I'm going to look at the deed.
I want to know
of the house, maybe some architectural plans, and find out what happened here.
I kind of want to go back to when she's looking out at the glen. Something that like really struck me. She says it wasn't simply that it was the most beautiful place I had ever been to, or that it filled me with both longing and mirth, but it just seemed right. And it just struck me because why does the spring court feel right to her? And I'm like, is Tamlin's not Mr. Right. We know that, but is he Mr. Right now? Or is it because that Starlight pool is making her feel that way?
I would love to see that it's like a portal or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, wouldn't that be really
that would
fun?
be super cool.
Well, I remember reading this for the first time and thinking that the Starlight pool was super weird. And then when they're like, let's go swim, I thought something like that was going to happen.
Well, and it is. Again, knowing this author, it is a very random thing.
It is.
Yeah. So,
but see, that's why I thought because at this point she wants you to think that Tamlin is Mr. Right and that this is where she belongs. And and at this point, if you're the first time reader, you're rooting for this to happen. You want her to feel right there. But then when you think about what's right next to that, like then they literally go over to the Starlight and you're like, oh, and so it's almost like it's like the red herring, like the trick.
Right. Well, and I want to point out, too, my daughter's reading the Throne of Glass series right now, and she read Assassin's Blade first, and she was like, so, like, none of these characters are in the next book. Like, what's going on? And I'm like, would you just keep reading, Whitney?
Just keep reading.
Keep reading. And, there's been things I've been asking her about because she said that, like, Arobin was back all of a sudden. And I was like, well, see, that part with him was very, very important. Yeah. And he needed to be hated for you to understand this part, right? So I do hope this comes back at some point.
Me too. It seems too random to not be something more.
Yeah.
Unless it's just like you're saying, it's just a hint toward what actually is right for her in the Night Court and Rhysand. But it just seems.
But I feel like she would have revisited that already if that's what it was.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many books are between Assassin's Blade and like Heir of Fire. 5?
That's true. Well,
and those are some big ass books.
And I'm on Tower of Dawn, which is the next to last one. It's the first time you see a character from Assassin's Blade.
Right.
Come back.
Yeah.
And a very random character. Yeah. Right.
One of the reasons that I found Tamlin so endearing in this section is because I think it's really just because he's vulnerable with Feyre, because he finally says, like, this was really important. This was a really important place to me. This was one of my favorite places to go when I was a kid, right? And it's like, I think that's really the only time that we see Tamlin be vulnerable in any way like that.
Does it make you wonder, knowing what we just talked about, if he and Rhysand would have been close if they hadn't hated each other first? Because they both definitely have like swagger, right? Like they're both like
Tamlin
get shit
doesn't
done.
have swagger.
No, I mean in terms of like getting stuff done.
Well, yeah,
right, and like the arrogance of like their court. But I guess probably all of them do. But having said that, would they? It's almost like I'm like a Cancer Leo, like on the line, and I don't necessarily like people from the same astrological sign because I'm a little intense, I've been told, and I mean they're both really intense, so they either would have been like best buddies or they would have still hated each other.
Well, they were friends.
Thank you, Whitney, who remembers everything. But cannot do the 30-second recap. Fill us in, please.
Yeah, they were friends. I don't know how long the friendship lasted, but in book 2, when Rhys is explaining like basically his life story to Feyre, he says, I felt for Tamlin because he was from a horrible family and his brothers were like worse than Lucian's brothers, and he kind of seemed like an outsider. So I reached out to him and like we were friends, and I taught him some Illyrian fighting stuff and we like hung out, whatever. But the friendship ended when Tamlin told his family, Rhys told me that his mom and his sister and Rhys are going to be at this place at this time, and they were going to go kill.
He sold him out. Yeah.
They were going to go kill Rhys.
Did he sell him out on accident though, or on purpose?
We don't know.
Okay.
We've only heard that story from Rhysand's point of view. We've never seen anybody ask Tamlin about it. So Rhys says that Tamlin's dad was threatened by Rhys, by Tamlin separately, but also by their friendship together. And so he was trying to go after Rhysand. Well,
and knowing how, it sounds like Tamlin's dad had a very low self-esteem and was very easily, what's the word I'm looking for? He felt challenged very easily.
Yeah.
And I wonder if the power of Tamlin and Rhysand together made his dad feel incompetent. So
it did.
Like, well, yeah. I'll just fix this real quick.
Rhysand basically says like Tamlin's dad was afraid that we were more powerful than he was because we were.
Yeah.
Like he had this fear. It's like he didn't want to admit the reality of what he was seeing, but he was still afraid of what he was seeing, you know? So Tamlin told them where Rhys and his parents or his mom and sister were going to be. But at the last minute, Rhysand changed his plans and didn't go meet them. So Tamlin and his family went, found Rhysand wasn't there, and killed his mom and sister instead of killing him. And that's how this whole like friendship ended. That's why they hate each other, really. Feyre made it worse. Feyre is not why they hate each other.
Oh, right.
You know?
I knew that, but like, it definitely isn't helping things.
No, no, but we don't know if Rhysand says it like, as far as he's concerned, Tamlin told them on purpose because his dad and I guess his brothers wanted to attack Rhysand, and Tamlin wasn't strong enough to stand up to them. That's basically what Rhys says.
It tracks.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you know what they say. There's like two sides of the story. There's three sides to every story. There's like his side, her side, and the truth or whatever.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's what he says.
Yeah.
Speaking of vulnerability, I loved what we learned about Lucian in this chapter.
Yeah,
and really loved I underlined something that said he had a habit of being with females who were a far cry from the nobility of the Autumn Court. And I wrote in my margins, I wrote, Lucian, you scoundrel. Because I can't imagine Lucian just like going around like just fucking everybody. Like I just can't. Like, and if that's what he was known for, you know what I mean? He was getting around with some peasants.
Well, and the high fae see it as like he's slumming, you know?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
I wrote down, with that whole conversation about Lucian and Lucian's story, Tamlin made it sound like, the way that he said it, it made it sound like Lucian's presence in the Spring Court was more political. Like, he was in my land, so his family trespassed in my land, so I had every right to defend against them.
He didn't say
whatever.
like, I was helping him.
I
felt for him. It was like, I did what I had to do because
he was my best friend. So
land.
yeah.
I read it as, we were kind of buddies and they trespassed on my land and I knew they were going to fuck him up. So sorry, they were on my land. Like I took it completely differently.
Well, I definitely think there was a connection there already. But
sure.
But what Whitney's saying is that when he's describing it, he's not describing it as like a buddy story. Like it's not a,
right.
It's like we were two best friends that were like getting away from things and it was an adventure. It's more like, well, I had to do it because they were on my land and
that's just how it's done.
That's how it is. Yeah. And again, that goes back to the point where I don't think he's capable of that kind of relationship.
I would like to, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I would love to get more information about Tamlin and Lucian's friendship.
Yeah.
Because we find out in Silver Flames, which is book 5, that Eris, Lucian's older brother, told Tamlin, take him and go to Springcourt. You know, my brothers are after him, which means that Tamlin and Lucian had to have had a close enough relationship at that point, or Eris and Tamlin had to have a close enough relationship at that point for Eris to be able to say that and trust that he would do it, right?
Do you think, and I think this is in book 2, but Whitney, I'm sure you can tell me, whenever they have Feyre and Lucian is still hunting for her and she is running across like the winter wasteland and his brothers show up, one of them is Eris, right?
Yes. Book 3, they're I think Eris is the only brother that's ever named.
I think the reason I'm asking that is because like people think that Eris also kind of has this redemption story that no one knows, but at the same time he's telling them to like kill everybody, right?
Well, so in that book 3, they're in the winter court and they're on the ice, and Eris is the one who is using his like autumn court firepower to melt the ice to like trap them. And he's also the one that grabs Feyre by her hair and like drags her across the ground and uses his fire to gag her, handcuff her, maybe both.
Whitney looks very excited. Well, did he use that fire to handcuff her or gag her or what?
I think it was both. But I remember being not weirded out, but like confused by these comments that you're referring to from Silver Flames of like, there's definitely a lot more to him that we don't know yet.
Well, because he says like, you don't know the whole story about Morrigan. Right? Like, you know, and I feel like he's going to be the one that gets the backstory probably out of, you know, all of these kind of side characters. And because he's very heavily mixed into that inner circle, right? Like he knows Tamlin, he knows Rhys, he has a relationship with Morrigan, he has a relationship with Lucian, obviously. His dad's this like asshole motherfucker.
There was a lot of foundation laid for an Eris POV, basically.
Definitely. And you know, there's some theories going around that he's Azriel's mate.
I've seen that. I disagree.
I mean, I might disagree, but I'm kind of for them at least trying. Sarah J. Maas writing about it for a couple of chapters. You know, I think it could be interesting. Like, what if Eris is gay and like he does come on to Az and Az is, you know, gonna be a little queer for a little bit? That would be fun.
I personally think that Eris and Mor are mates, and that's the like you don't understand that he's talking about in Silver Flames. And I think that she's using.
Well, that means he could also be gay.
I mean,
maybe
yeah,
they
he could
both
be.
Are.
Yeah,
you know,
he could be. But I think that is a couple, if not the couple, that Sarah Maas is gonna write about, like rejecting the mating bond. You know what I mean?
Okay. So why do you think Morrigan's bi?
I don't know. I guess I just thought that she had originally had said that, like that she prefers women.
She does,
but that she'll also sleep with guys.
Well, she's only slept with one guy, right?
No, I think she slept with a lot of.
Okay, so this is me reading into it.
Not necessarily a lot. I think she has slept with more than one guy. I think when in book 3, when Mor is telling Feyre, I'm just laughing at myself because I'm like, yes, I do know this. I remember when she's telling Feyre that she is gay, basically, that she prefers women. It's really telling Feyre why she won't be in a relationship with Azriel, right? And she says at one point, I think it confuses him when I bring home a guy. Because I think Feyre had asked, like, do you think he knows that you prefer women? And she's like, I don't know, because I think I confuse him because I bring home guys sometimes.
And
to like drive the point home, you know?
Helion have a little,
they
have
sleep
a
together.
little tryst.
Yeah, that's true
I
too.
felt like she pretty much said she was doing that to kind of pull the wool over everyone's eyes.
It's for Azriel, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe to pull the wool over everybody else's eyes, but it's she basically says to Feyre, like,
so she would rather be with a woman, but she would sleep with a man.
She would rather be
That's
with
how I
a
read
woman, but she doesn't want to be open about it.
Well, because she talks about like the time with Helion like not being enjoyable.
Right.
At
Well, Feyre says, we heard them last night, but she does not look like in the morning, like she does not look satisfied.
Mindy taught me a new term last year called FF. Do you know what? Whitney's looking at me.
FF to me means fast forward.
Well, that
like on your VCR.
for those of you that don't know, FF means freshly fucked, which apparently
like,
Morgan looked not freshly fucked.
Not FF.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, why am I the only one? I'm starting to feel old. Like, is this a generational thing? I would love for someone to comment on our Instagram page if they've heard of this term, because I grew up in the 80s and this was like a huge thing. Like everybody said this.
I don't know that, but we also have referenced She's All That, which is a 90s movie, isn't it? Or early 2000s at the
90s.
latest. And I just referenced VCRs. So we have a lot of generational divides going on. I know, right? Oh, my in-laws do still have a VCR though. I don't think they use it.
I will say our last girls trip, we went up to a cabin that had a VCR and
That's
we
true.
watched a movie on it.
We used the VCR and we knew how to use the VCR too.
We sure did.
One of the things I wrote down that makes me laugh right now, it says, I wrote down, Tamlin finds talking to people difficult. Why is he like this? Oh, man. The next thing I wrote down was like, what did his family do to him? And that was something that I thought about too when he's talking about the Glen being a favorite place of his as a kid. I wrote down like, what was he hiding from?
What was he escaping
What was
from?
he escaping? Yeah. If he spent all this time out in the Glen, like what was going on back home that he ran out to be by himself?
Can I also say, what two masochists are they when he says, they say drinking from this and you'll be happy until your last breath? I would have been drinking that
Right,
shit
I would have been
down.
like gulping.
Neither of them. Feyre won't even put her face near the water. I'm like, drink it.
know.
Just
Yeah.
drink it.
I thought
God.
that was weird.
Because you know what? You're going to be happy in your happiest moment. So maybe you would have gotten a resand faster. I don't know. But like, how come you guys are not in there like gulping this down?
I wonder if in this world that Sarah Maas has created, like in her head, if you actually did drink it, like something horrible would happen. You know what I mean? And like
Yeah.
if it's going to come back up later.
Right.
If I don't, but I thought that was really weird. I mean, the whole Starlight pool was weird in general, but that specific conversation was weird.
Right.
To not do something with it. Right.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
why
I would
bring
have
that
at least
up?
like put my tongue on it or
Yeah,
something.
like take a little
like, and I don't,
solution to
I
do
mean,
it.
I don't
See
know
what
about you
happens.
guys, but I've never swam anywhere and not gotten water in my nose or in my mouth.
Yeah.
ever.
for sure.
Yeah.
Right. But I also really love to swim, and I'm like under the water singing like the Little Mermaid.
Yeah.
with my kids. I wasn't going to do it. Thank you.
You're welcome. But yeah, that drinking Starlight thing, I was like, maybe this is based on like folklore or whatever. And maybe it still is. But I searched for like 30 minutes and then gave up because I could not find any reputable anything about Starlight, about drinking Starlight. I tried to Google it in multiple different ways, wordings, but it kept bringing me to some video game.
That's because it's actually unicorn blood from Harry Potter.
Right? Like, I was like, where did she get this from? Like, what? It's got to be out there somewhere. I'm sure it is, unless she just created that in her own head. But it kept telling me about this video game that I don't even know what it was called. Like, you could use Starlight in the video game to like heal your character or avatar or whatever. And it was weird.
The fairies use Starlight in The Legend of Zelda.
See, I don't know that game.
That's my nerdiest thing of my 40 years.
I loved Legend of Zelda.
Love it.
I'm telling you, my notes are so like, I don't know what kind of mood I was in when I wrote this. Feyre calls Tamlin the High Lord of Foolery because she thinks that he's like messing with her. Yeah. And I said, nothing less true has ever been said. Because like I said, this is one of the only times that we see Tamlin like this, right? Like vulnerable, playful, endearing, and super charming. Like, I mean, I know that he does stuff that Feyre really is into later on, but for me as a reader, this is one of the only times that he comes off so sweet.
But
for
also,
me, you know,
also makes her feel pretty too, because there's a part where it says, slowly, so slowly, his eyes roved down and then up, and I could have sworn the gleam in his eyes turned feral and hungry. And then she says Tamlin's glorious body. So it's kind of like you could see them getting closer as you're reading it, but it's the first time they both, like, there was like a level of attraction.
And I wrote that that's the first time that we've seen either of them really loosen up at all.
That's true.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and we know that Feyre says about herself, I've never been lovely a day in my life. And just a few chapters later, she's seeing like, oh, he's attracted to me. So like her confidence level is growing, like you're saying.
But I think this is the part where Mindy's going to say she turns into a brat, because I think I know what you're talking about, because she starts to feel better about things and essentially starts to blame him for it,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, no, that's true. I also wrote down when she talks about Tamlin's glorious body, I said underpants time. Tamlin's glorious body. Ew. But one thing, this
Why
is
did you write ew?
Do we think Tamlin wears
Tamlin.
boxers or briefs?
I don't think any of them wear underwear.
I don't think they have anything
I mean,
going
if
on.
wear underwear at all.
if you're lacing up your pants, I feel like unless you're wearing tidy whities, that shit's getting in the way.
See, I
Right?
feel like
Yeah, that's probably
Tamlin,
true.
if he were to wear underwear, would definitely be tidy whities.
Oh, I don't.
Superhero.
No, here yeah.
Underoos.
So here's my thing. Here's where my mind goes. After our nerdiest cocktail, a couple of those tonight. If they're, these guys are not trimming the hedges. If you get my drift. So if
True.
they're not wearing underwear, it's a lot. It's a lot easier to lace up over underwear than it is a fuzzy forest.
I would just like to know that for my mom, who's probably listening, I'm embarrassed by this conversation, Mom.
For all of our friends listening, no one's that shocked.
I'm just joking.
Mrs. Landway, I'm still an amazing friend to your daughter, and I make her laugh on a day-to-day basis. But you knew what you were getting into.
I did write down a deeper question than just underpants time. I said, Tamlin's checking her out, right? But I don't think she's been in the spring court for that long at this point. I'm fuzzy on the timeline here.
I'm
but
feeling like a few weeks, maybe.
Yeah.
maybe
3 weeks.
And I wrote down, what does Tamlin see in Feyre's, what I assume is a gaunt frame still, because she was literally starving to death when she got there, right? Versus, what does Tamlin see versus what Rhysand sees when he picks her up from spring court and sees how thin she is, and we know that he's so worried about her, right? Like, I just wonder, what does she look like in those two different areas of her or times of her life, and what do they see?
I really think of Tamlin as finding beauty in more of a Victorian point of view of like beauty standards of like women are waifish and they're pale and they are to cover their body and they are to be meek and modest and do all of these things. And so that might be very attractive for him because, and I mean, he even says later, there are no high ladies, right, of any of these courts. So like a woman is to be subservient and to be in her place, whereas Rhysand wants a fighter. So having a gaunt, starved mate is not very attractive to him.
Rhysand understands that her losing weight is correlated to her state of mind, right?
Right.
And so when she is not doing well, she is not eating.
Yeah.
And so it's for him more like, we've got to get you to just a level where you're okay again, where
I could relate to Feyre more if she was a comfort eater.
right. I've never.
I know. I've never been stressed out and been like, I lost 5 pounds this week.
I know.
Great.
That's like a depression symptom that I did not get.
I know.
I've got all the other
bummer
ones
for me.
But I just thought that was an interesting thing for me to think about, because it's almost like lust versus concern with Tamlin versus Rhysand, and the like what they see and how they respond to it. But I also don't know in Sarah Maas's mind of like what Feyre really looks like in this Glen scene versus what she looks like when Rhysand is worried about her,
When you love someone in the way that you want them to be their best selves, right? If my spouse wasn't eating and, looked tired and was doing all of that, I would not find that very attractive because they're not their best selves, right? And I think that, to your point, Rhys-Ann knows that her best self isn't this rail thin person who doesn't speak their mind, right?
That's true.
And to go back to like the beauty standards thing, I think it's just a way that the courts look at things differently. I mean, the night court is all about eating and drinking and having lots of friends and going to the shops at night and being a painter and doing all these things.
Yeah.
And I feel like in the spring court, the women are made to be seen and not heard.
Yeah.
Well, and also we've talked so much about how Tamlin has no swag. Like, he's not, like, I don't get the impression that he knows what he wants in a woman, or like that he even like dates, or like we don't hear about him dating or liking anybody.
I've said this before. He's got to have something going on for someone to be so pissed off that she cursed him.
Yeah.
He wouldn't sleep with her. She must have gotten a peek or something.
But that's what I'm saying. But that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying though. Like he even, I mean, she is a total bitch, but like he didn't give in to any of her shit, really.
But
like, I mean, he
but
wasn't.
She's also a strong female.
True, that is true.
And if
That might
that's
have been
not
a
what he
turn off,
finds
complete
attractive,
turn off. Yeah,
right?
Well,
True.
and she was also connected to really a good friend of his father, who he is very much is reacting against.
Yeah.
So, like, just the fact that she would
Whitney
have been
learned that in book 8 that none of you have read yet.
I think that's a strike against her, no matter what she was actually like, that she was close
But
with his
regardless,
dad.
like we hear nothing about any other relationships he's had with any other women, because he
true.
grew up with a bunch of men in
That's true.
this war band. Like
And
that's
his-
all he knows.
And his mom is the only
Yeah.
woman that we even know
and
anything about.
Again, if you're being raised with warriors and that's the only thing they do, like women are very dispensable. They're not seen as partners.
Yeah.
One thing that I had forgotten, they're talking about their lives and their backgrounds with each other. One thing that I had forgotten is that Tamlin was like destined to be High Lord the whole time, based on what he tells us. And maybe I'm thinking about Rhys-Ann's story in book 2, but I know that at one point either Tamlin tells Feyre or Rhys-Ann tells Feyre that Tamlin's brothers were so horrible to him because they could sense his power, and that he was
does
gonna
say that.
Does
in
Tamlin
this.
say that?
Yeah, he
Okay.
talks about that they resented him because he didn't want any part of that.
See, and that's what in my mind, I had remembered it as he only became High Lord because everyone else in his family died.
Well,
I mean, it is, but
it's a toxic masculinity. Will you please say that word for me?
Toxic masculinity.
Thank you. There is this like machismo of like they are gonna take him out.
Yeah.
Because he is more powerful than them, because they're gonna be worried the whole time that he's gonna like rise to power, instead of him being like, you know what, I'm gonna hang out over here. I
Yeah.
don't care. I'd rather eat bread and have sex and you do you and take on all that stress. But like,
Right.
it was never like good enough, I felt like, right? So they were like,
which is interesting because Lucien does the same thing. Like, it just hit me. Like, maybe that's what they sort of bonded over. Like, neither of them wanted that position. Like, Lucien, that's why Lucien went off and like with the undesirable women or whatever. He was like, I don't want any part of that anyways. Y'all have at it,
But also Lucien talks about it in terms of like, I'm never going to be the High Lord. I was never going to be
Right,
the High
that's
Lord.
true.
Like, whatever, it doesn't matter. And Tamlin seems to be saying
That he probably could have been.
they all knew that I was going to be the High Lord. If it's true that I'm understanding this correctly, that Tamlin was expected to be the High Lord because they knew that he was more powerful, then I don't understand his kind of resentment that he seems to have too, of like, I never wanted this. Because I'm like, you can't have it both ways.
But
right?
I think my understanding when he was talking in these chapters was that he was legit was rejecting it. That's why he was like, I'm going to go off and I'm going to be this warrior. I'm going to make sure that I'm so good at this other thing that I don't have to do that.
Yeah.
Like, I think he was trying to just say, you all have it. I don't want
want that.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Like, he was rejecting what he knew was what could have been his. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like, I don't know that he ever thought that he would actually end up being that.
And then he had to. Because he
to.
was the only one left. That whole conversation, showing a genuine interest in Feyre's life and asking her questions because he seems like he genuinely wants to learn about her. That was another thing that I was like, he's coming off as really sweet. Like, this is sweet that he, you know, he's not telling her she's insignificant anymore, right?
Well, I mean, he did pay enough attention because he said, you know, how did your father lose his fortune? And she said, well, how did you know that? And he said, well, you don't speak like
Right.
a peasant. So, I mean, he did notice, you know, that she was smart, right? And eloquent. And so I think that is something that, again, was a win for him.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Right now, not later.
Not
Just
later.
for now. One thing I noted at the very end of that chapter 18, Feyre is talking to Lucien about like the surreal and, you know, you sent me and then you didn't come help me. Like, screw you, Betty, is kind of where she's going there. She says she waited until Tamlin was far enough away that like even his Fey ears couldn't pick up what she was saying.
I was like, bullshit. He could hear everything.
And that's what I was like, there's no way that you were far enough away, first of all. And then it just made me think in book 2 when she talks about, you know, she wakes up to throw up all the time and Tamlin never even like moves.
Yeah.
Right? Like
That's why I said he's nice right now.
right now. Right.
Yeah.
Well, and it made me curious about multiple times in this book and in book 2 where she's like unsure about his power, the extent of his Fey hearing, whatever. And it just makes me curious, like, what is it really? Like, how
I thought that
off
was a weird
is she, you know?
exchange too. Like, I thought that was sort of, felt very contrived because Tamlin's not going to just like, oh, I'll just be up here while you all talk
Not
back
listening.
there.
Right.
You
Right.
know, like,
I want to go back and say too to what you said about him obviously hearing her throw up. If someone gags in my house, I can hear it.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't know if it's like the mom gene or what, but like if I had Fey hearing, I would never sleep. How do these
Right.
people sleep through farts and coughs and sneezes?
See, Darren does though. My husband does. He'll sleep through anything.
Is he Fey?
He might be.
Even if you were barfing, he wouldn't hear it.
Probably not.
But like,
But
he's not Fey.
I have
But,
slept
he's
through
not Fey.
Robbie. Robbie had really bad food poisoning a couple of years ago, and I completely slept through
See,
it.
I can't sleep through any of that either. And my kids tell me their stomach hurts, and I'm up all night waiting for them to throw up.
Me too.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to deal with that.
Me.
Can I say at least Lucien gives her like a half-assed apology right now? Like, oh, I wasn't going to come for you, and then I decided to. Sorry.
But then he says he still wants to see her. Like, he's like, I still want to see you dead. But
See,
But Tamlin would have been pissed.
I feel like this conversation shows a turning point for Lucien because he basically is like, nobody would have saved the Surreal. Nobody.
exactly.
Right.
That's the thing.
they
that
keep
he
seeing
respects about her.
Yeah, they keep seeing this humanity in Feyre that is so different than what they think humans are going to be like. All right, so let's go into chapter 19. There's a lot of stuff I know we all want to talk about. So the first thing that I wanted to say, you know, Tamlin, is taking Feyre to the gallery. He's had it cleaned and, you know, looking great. And she is so overwhelmed, not just with the gallery itself, but also with the fact that he has done this for her. It's like a grand gesture. And she is so grateful and says, he's done all this for me. And it made me think about back in one of the earlier episodes when Tamlin tells Feyre that she's not significant enough to worry about. And we talked about how that was a way, by telling her that, he's able to make her feel more special, like right here. Mm-hmm. Right? So she knows that he has just been seeing her as this like dumb human, but now he's doing these really nice things for her. And it made me sad, honestly. Like, it made me sad for her to feel like, wow, he did something nice for me.
Well, and
like,
I think
that's the bare minimum, right?
Right, it is. And I think why, if you've read all of these books already, you know that the bare minimum goes away really fast. Like, you know, as soon as
true.
he's displeased,
Yeah.
these things go away.
But I also think that like that wasn't like he had no idea how she was gonna. He was shocked by like how speechless she was. But you don't realize now until she hits that how starved she was for art in her life. I
Yeah.
don't think she even realized how starved she was for art. And, she spends hours in there. Yeah. I don't think Tamlin knew that was gonna. I don't even think Tamlin thought he was doing anything super special. Like, I think he was just like, oh, she likes art, let me show you the gallery, because he doesn't give a fuck about it. Like,
well, he cared enough and knew enough to have it like cleaned, right? He wouldn't let her in there until it was cleaned and looking like spick and span.
I felt like that was more about like
appearances.
Oh, like his own court.
Kinda.
Right.
Yeah, I can see that.
I mean, it's just like I wouldn't let anyone that I didn't know super well up in my studio if it wasn't spotless.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
That's true.
Like that, I don't know if that was for her.
Yeah, it may not have been. That's
the
true.
art still looks the same when there's dust bunnies in the corner.
But I mean, I see what you're saying for sure. Like that was definitely like a bare minimum gesture. But I honestly, again, I forget how awkward Tamlin really is when it comes to girls. Like I truly don't think he knows what he's doing unless Lucian tells him to. He tells him what to do, how to woo.
That's true.
Or, it's something like this that's sort of in my opinion, kind of an accident that it was. To her, it's a grand gesture. To him, he had no idea what that meant to her until she was in there.
Dumb luck a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, I do want to point out, much to your point a few minutes ago, Whitney, when you were talking about how Tamlin could obviously probably hear her throwing up and stuff in the next book. She talks about how she's still plagued by these dreams that she is having where there's she's dreaming about the deaths she's witnessed, the deaths that she's caused, and the horrible pale woman ripping me to shreds, all watched over by a shadow I could never quite glimpse. So she's having nightmares all the time. And, we've talked before about how we think it might be dreams of what Rhysand is seeing. And, it's really, really scary. And no one in that court, and I mean, take Tamlin out of the picture. You've still got Lucian and a whole house of people that are not asking her if she's okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
No one is ever stepping back and saying, maybe we should check on her. Maybe someone should sleep next door or stay up late with her one night if it seems like she's not going to be able to sleep. You know what I mean? Because, and that's the thing about depression, why it feels so lonely, is people don't know how to relate to you and don't know how to ask, right? But there were probably 50 people around. Hopefully one out of 50.
I'm surprised Alice, because Alice got all offended when Feyre was like, you don't understand. And she's like, don't tell me I don't understand. I've got family. I know, she got all offended about that. If she really understood, why isn't she helping a little more? Like, I don't know. I just feel like Alice has been pretty absent. But to your point too about the dreams, I wanted to point out, because this really stood out to me about the shadow, because I missed the episode where she had the one dream about Andrus, and I had gone into a little bit about like dream interpretation, what it means in a dream when a stranger is stalking you or when there's a shadow there. And it just, in actuality, it means certain troubles are haunting you, or it could foretell persisting troubles and misfortunes. But then when I see it in this, because there's a shadow in that dream too with Andrus. That's why I looked that up, and that's the only reason I remembered it. So I'm wondering if that's Rhys watching her through the mating, watching her dreams through the bond.
That's interesting.
That is interesting. I like that.
Because he still doesn't know technically who she is until he sees her, right?
Right. And it's described as this shadow. It's described as this shadow watching her. And that's why I looked up like stalking, because I thought it was like a stalker. And it didn't occur to me even then, knowing what I knew, that it might just be Rhys watching through their bond, and she's seeing it as a shadow.
But then I'm still confused as to why she's dreaming about Amarantha without knowing anything about Amarantha.
Well, but maybe that's what he's also seeing, is what I'm saying. Like, he's watching
like they're both connected.
She's almost in the middle of it. Like, she's like stuck in the middle of this. He's watching whatever's going on with Amarantha killing people or whatever, and she's sort of in the front there, and then he's that shadow in the back. I don't know. I just thought that was interesting that, again, Sarah J. Maas doesn't do anything on accident, and there's a shadow in both those dreams. So I'm going to be looking, and every time she dreams, that there's a shadow in there.
I don't remember. Old temples, you're looking for shadows. What are you looking for, Whit?
I'm always looking for connections to the Night Court, I guess. But I don't remember the shadow in the first dream. That's really interesting. I'll have to go back and read that again, because I will.
I'd like to point out that in episode 8 of our podcast, there was something that Whitney did not remember.
This one? Yeah. I was like, what was it?
Like, wait, what?
So one thing that I noted about the gallery, and I guess I just now thought of an explanation for the question that I had. But Tamlin just like leaves her in there. He's like, well, I'm going to leave you to it. And then he just goes, which while I was reading it, I was like, what are you doing? Which I guess it's back to his awkwardness.
As someone that appreciates art, though,
well, yeah, that's true. Yeah, let me have my moment.
I don't want someone that doesn't appreciate art in there with me, because she talks about spending the whole day in there.
Yeah.
And when I went to the Met a couple of years ago, I spent 8 hours on one floor.
Oh, wow.
One. So, like, I was kind of relieved that he left her, instead of being like, well, look at the brush strokes here.
Yeah,
and
give
she's
her
like
a
that.
weird
She's
tour.
like, that's printmaking. Like, so I understand why he left. He doesn't know what to talk about in there.
Yeah.
Well, and shortly before he leaves her in there, he says, like, I didn't realize humans were capable of, I'm assuming what he means is like the level of emotion that she's having, which I wonder if he was having like an existential crisis.
I'm going to help you know existential.
Thank you. What did I say?
Existential.
They went extinct during their
Did they
existentialism.
maybe they did go extinct. I don't know. Sorry. Thank you. Because I'm like, what was he taught about humans, right? Because he's like, I thought you guys were all
His dad
stupid
used them
and
as slaves, of course. Like, because if you're degrading them and making them stupid, then they're not important.
well, yeah, I guess that's true. But even to think that like you're not capable of deep emotion, you know what I mean? Like, you don't have to be educated to feel emotion.
But the Fae do feel things more. Just because their senses are heightened and everything's heightened, they do feel things more than humans.
Can you guys
In his
imagine
mind-
feeling more than we already do?
I know, right?
That sounds
I was
awful.
just thinking that sounded
But I mean,
terrible.
in his mind, like, that's, again, to your point, humans were slaves. They were worker bees. They didn't have that kind of emotion.
Yeah.
And then like Fae, their senses are completely, because when Feyre becomes Fae, all of a sudden everything becomes even more, heightened. And so she doesn't even realize that. So, I mean, there's that, again, that gap of they don't really know anything about the other's lifestyle.
Yeah, that just made me think. It made me giggle while you were talking. It made me think of when Nesta and Elaine get changed into Fae, and Elaine is like, "Will I hear the earthworms crawling through the dirt?" I saw
You fucking creep.
I saw a meme one time that was like that whole line that Elaine's like, "Will I hear this? Will I see the Firebird?" And it's Julia Louis-Dreyfus going, "Oh, what the fuck." It made me laugh and giggle while you were talking. Sorry, I wasn't laughing at you.
Spoiler alert, Elaine gets weird.
Yeah, I know, right?
She does not handle it. I mean, no one handles it well, but
No,
she
definitely does not handle it well. So basically, we transition out of the gallery into Feyre saying, I stopped being scared. I was painting all the time, which I wrote like with a little heart, like her small wild dream come true, right? Like that's all she wanted, is just to be able to be safe enough and comfortable enough to paint. And she gets to do that. So she basically starts to get angry at Tamlin as she's realizing, like,
Let's hang on before we get to that. There's that line. She's already starting to like feel a little something for Tamlin, because before all this happens, she talks about when he gets called away to the borders. She's like, even painting couldn't distract me until he returned. His safe return was enough. Like, she's already worrying about him.
I
She's
wrote that
already
down,
like
too.
putting herself out there. Of course, that's sort of like, you think about, she's worried about other people all her life. It sort of falls into her little pattern. So she starts doing this. She starts like getting more involved and getting more into, worrying about him and getting into what his life's about and that kind of stuff. And then,
Well, I want to say too, I said this before we turned on the mic tonight, but when he does come back and, she says that, all of my self-pity must seem absurd. And he said, if it grieves you, I don't think it's absurd at all. And it talks about how he kisses her palms. It says, he kissed it carefully in a way that made heat begin pounding in my core between my legs, which makes me think, dear God, what did he do to her palms? Or how bad was Isaac in bed?
Yeah.
Like seriously?
Yeah.
Because
he wasn't doing it
if
for her.
someone was kissing my palms, I'd be like, what are you, like, you know, I have a vagina, right? It's there. What
Honestly,
are you doing?
I think that it's just the fact that somebody is making her feel special, because even like with Isaac, you know, she was very clear they were not in a relationship.
Well, and he was
right?
engaged and they were still having
Like,
sex, right?
It was not about Feyre being special. It was not about Isaac being special. There was no like romance. There was no
There was no wooing going on there.
Well, she said most of the time they never even spoke.
Right.
Yeah.
And this Isaac is the only experience that she has, right? So Tamlin is now the first person that is trying to woo her.
Which is, like, to your point, like, man, that must have been really bad, because Tamlin with no swag, like, total weirdo,
I'm like, did he
is
lick
turning
your
her
ball?
on.
Like, what did
Well, but he's also like really hot.
I'm like,
true,
did
true.
he suck on your finger? Because at least that.
Maybe he
like,
did.
I mean, he kissed her palm, but I'm like, maybe if he like, you know. I mean, please don't suck my fingers, editor of our podcast. But like, did he do something more that she doesn't want to kiss and tell? Because if that's all it takes, I mean,
I feel like that's all it takes
That's all
at
it
this
takes.
point
At
in
this
her
point,
life.
yeah.
Like, that's all she needs.
But
you
even
know,
before that happens, like, she's starting to like sort of have these feelings for them. But I mean, I wrote down Feyre is insufferable. Like, she gets cranky when she realizes that she's forgetting about her family, and that like her family's probably forgotten about her, which I might point out she wanted in the first place. She didn't want that responsibility anyways. And she complained about it all the time. But now that it's not there, she's like, oh, they forgot about me. And then she blames it on Tamlin because he, quote, let her do that. Like, first of all, Tamlin doesn't know what the fuck he's doing anyways. So, but to her, he let her. And it just kind of reminded me of those old, honestly, I think they were Vines or memes or whatever, where this is why my 2-year-old is crying. Like, Feyre, chill out. Like, the quote I wrote down is, I'd let him erase me. He'd
wrote that down
offered
too.
me paints and the space and time to practice. He'd shown me pools of starlight. He'd saved my life like some kind of feral knight in a legend, and I'd gulped it down like fairy wine. I was no better than those zealot children of the blessed. And I said, the nerve of Tamlin saving you. What an asshole for giving you things. And then the difference between her and the children of the blessed is the children of the blessed didn't know anything about the truth, and Feyre does.
Can
So,
I
like,
say
I
though,
thought that was kind of unfair of her to say.
it sounds like she's going through the stages of grief to me. There used to be 5 stages of grief. Now there's 7 apparently, which I didn't know.
I didn't know that.
So
I'm glad we can spend more time in stages of grief.
I know.
with
I thought you were going to say,
two
I'm glad we can
extra.
spend more time on this, Deborah.
No,
Sorry.
that would be horrible.
It would. That's why I looked at you so shocked. So 7 stages of grief instead of 5 are shock, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, testing, and acceptance. Because I think when you're grieving something, right, you have to go through it. She has nothing to be angry at right now except
Right.
for him. He did take her away from her promise, and he did take her away from like everything that she knew, right? So I'd be interested to see if the next stage that we see her in is the bargaining stage, because I mean, she did bargain for paints, right? She is doing all of these things to kind of
Yeah.
make her get through this, because I think guilt would be a very obvious part of this
But in
process.
this one chapter, she switches from that to, then she turns it into when they go in the garden and he's asking her about it. Instead of saying, you made me forget everything, she's like, I just feel so bad about myself. It's like all this self-pity, and like all of a sudden it turns into that. Like, I feel like she never actually worked through that whole, it's your fault. All of a sudden she's pitying herself, and then he does these nice things, and then she's, quote, craving his warmth.
They're both known for talking about their feelings at length, aren't they? And just being super transparent with each other. So I'm surprised she didn't do that.
See,
I know, but-
I saw that whole conversation as her just struggling with like her place and her purpose, because we've talked before about how like that promise to her mom to take care of everybody was her purpose, right? And I think that she's just flailing and trying to figure out like, okay, I don't have that anymore, like that's done and they're okay, but like what does that mean for me?
It's interesting you say that, because my very first note on this chapter is that now that she doesn't have to worry about her mom and her promise, her new purpose or mantra is to follow the Suriel's advice, because she says it over and over and
true.
over again. Stay with the High Lord. He will keep you safe. Things will get better. She keeps telling herself
So
that.
you and I have talked at length about, you know, when you're a parent, or even like in friends groups or anything, there's leaders and followers, right? Mm-hmm. And Feyre, there has to be followers, right? That's not always a negative, right? Followers definitely have their place. And Feyre is a follower, right? Especially at this point in the series, because she is always looking at what Whitney's point is, like, what is her purpose right now, right? And she not until later in the series starts to find, like, what her purpose is on her own. She's always asking someone else. She even asks Rhys-Anne what her purpose is, right? So when she doesn't feel like she has a purpose, I feel like she kind of goes backwards in a step.
She breaks
of grief.
down.
Yeah, for sure, because she has not built up the confidence that she needs. Having said that, because, you know, we've talked a million times about how, like, none of these characters are the best people on earth, right? Because that's just not very fun writing. Like, she is being a brat, but she's also grieving.
And I agree with you. And that's sort of where I go when I'm like, okay, so like I end up rooting for her. I will always root for her. I think she's an amazing character. I love her. But I forget that sometimes this is what she does. And it does come from her trauma and her upbringing. Why don't we do that for Tamlin? We just kind of brush him aside and villainize him. There has to be good guys and bad guys to make for an interesting story. Like you said.
Let me ask you this though. Do you feel like Tamlin tries to become a better person? Because I do feel like Feyre tries. I feel like that's the difference.
I don't think Tamlin, but again, I don't think Tamlin knows. I think, and again, it all goes down to how you respond. And I would love to see him work on that. But I also think that, like, going back to intentions, Tamlin's intentions, no matter how messed up, and he fucks up. Like, I am not excusing anything he does when he traps her. That is the most traumatizing thing. I cannot imagine. I've been in a situation where I felt trapped like that. I don't like that. I don't forgive him for that. But his intention in that moment, and you see it even here because he talks about keeping her safe. He's always thinking about keeping her safe.
Well, and I'm just playing the devil's advocate here. Do you not think that all abusers think they're doing the right thing?
No, I totally agree. I'm not saying he's not an abuser.
I know. And that's why I'm just saying I'm playing the devil's advocate, because it is very easy to be like, well, he loves her and he's trying to do what's right. But my point is that he doesn't reflect and go like, holy shit, I locked her up. Yeah. Instead, he goes, I'm going to send a bunch of people back, and, you know, hell or high water, she's coming back to me, whether or not she's happy, whether or not she's eating, whether or not I will fucking lock her up again.
Even if she wrote me a letter that says, I'm not coming back. Yeah,
no, exactly.
Again, he's dumb. Like, he really is dumb as a box of rocks. Like, but I don't feel sorry for him.
Well,
I don't feel sorry for him about that.
He
but
craves
I'm just saying,
love as much as she does, though. And so when she is being like the slightest inkling of nice to him, he's like, well, she couldn't have ill intentions because she loves me.
And again, I don't think I'm not excusing any of these characters for doing this crap that they do. And it's so funny because I feel like I'm kind of comparing Tamlin to Dahmer, because I also watched this Dahmer thing and I'm like obsessed with it right now. The stuff he did that I had no idea was just disgusting and cruel. And
do you think he knew it was bad?
I think he did. Yes. He says he knows it was bad.
Yes.
You also see where it comes from. It's an understanding. And I think that's where I went from. So when I read it the first time, I was like, okay, oh, Tamlin, you know, we're always like, oh, he's the, you know, when you first read this, it's like, oh, she's supposed to be with him or whatever. And then you kind of like fall off and realize that he's not. And then when I read it again, and I hate him even more because I'm like, oh God, look at all these red flags. Like, and now that I'm reading it, I'm somewhere in between. I think I'm in that space of, I don't really like him still, but I do understand some of where he's coming from. Doesn't mean I agree with everything he does.
I don't think I've said it on the podcast, but I've said it in conversations about these books, because again, we do just talk about these books just in life.
So like even tonight I was like, guys, save it for the podcast. That's what I wanted to say. I was like, let's stop talking about this. Save it for the podcast.
Yeah. I've said before, like, I view book 1 in this series as like it is for Feyre, it's like the first serious relationship, right? And when I think about my first serious relationship, it reminds me a lot of Feyre and Tamlin. And I think maybe that's why I'm always trying to understand.
Here's the difference though, between your first serious relationship and Feyre's first serious relationship. My first serious relationship was a 16-year-old.
Right.
Feyre's first
That's
serious
true.
relationship is what, a 500-year-old? So he should know better. But
That's true.
again,
He should.
because
Also the 500-year-old that has the swag of a 14-year-old.
I mean, that's true. But, I mean, again, something was working for him because someone cursed him. Even as a reader, and we've said this a million times, you're still rooting for him at the end of this book. You still want
that's
them
true.
to be together.
That is true.
Because he does enough to make the reader and Feyre feel important that it feels like love. And then later, and this is why this writing is so brilliant, Sarah J. Maas helps you realize that it was abuse when Feyre realizes it was abuse. And you feel like the wool's been pulled over your eyes, not in a bad way, but that's why these books are so fantastic, because you're like, holy shit, how did I not see that?
Yeah.
So then you read it a second time and you're like, I hate him. And then you read it, how many times is this for you, Whit?
8.
You read it maybe the fourth time for me. And you're like, okay, I get where he's coming from. I understand how I fell for it. And it doesn't even have to be your first relationship.
Yeah.
Someone giving you what you need in that moment.
Yeah.
Or someone that is highly charming and manipulative. So like the opposite of Tamlin. Like Feyre was getting what she needed. But all of us have been in a relationship with someone that like they know what they're doing and they are manipulating us into giving us what we need, even though they're not going to be that person later. It's very easy to fall into this and to feel guilty about it later.
Yeah.
But that's victim shaming. And let's not do that, right?
Yeah.
Like we all are humans and we have emotions and we feel things very strongly. So you learn what you learn in abuse and you try not to do it again.
Yeah.
Sometimes it does happen again,
Yeah.
but you just try to get better every single time until you find your person, or you don't and you're strong on your own.
Yeah.
And maybe you don't need to be with anybody.
Tamlin as an abuser, I have that hope that he could become somebody who looks back at himself and says, that was a dick and I need to fix this. Because when you think about it, he doesn't go off and do it to anybody else. He basically like abuses himself. Mm-hmm. Like he turns it on himself.
But he doesn't treat her better.
No, he doesn't. That's what I'm saying.
He might see what he's doing, but he doesn't learn from it.
No, not yet. But I'm saying I feel like there is that thread, that thin thread of hope that eventually, because we still haven't seen how all this is played out.
I totally agree. I think there is a chance for him to go in that direction because, he's so horrible to Feyre in book 3 at the meeting of all the High Lords, and like how he talks. And we've talked about this in previous episodes about like basically high fae revenge porn.
Yeah.
He's awful. And then what gives me a little bit of hope is he helps her 2 times at the end of that 3rd book. He helps her escape from Hybern's camp, even though it basically outs him as an enemy of Hybern when he's been working as like a double agent. So he did put himself at great risk to help her.
An Ember of Life.
He says to Feyre, like, be happy, which I feel like is a big moment of growth for him.
It's a step in the right direction.
It's definitely from, the horrible things that he said about her in front of all the high fae to by the end of that book saying like doing something that he really does not want to do for her happiness. I think that is a big step in the right direction. But then in Silver Flames, like you're saying, he's not like, he didn't just find a new person to lock in the house, right? Like he's not even a functioning human being. Right. And I think that Silver Flames is his time of looking back and being like, I effed up majorly.
See, I feel like though Lucian by the end of Silver Flames had some growth to do because
I agree.
He is feeling extremely guilty still about leaving Tamlin.
Yeah.
And going to the Night Court and going to his mate because Elaine doesn't want him. He could have stayed in the spring court, and he chooses not to. And he's not really, Tamlin, I mean, reconciled with that yet, about leaving someone behind, leaving a failing court, someone that he, was supposed to be very, very, very close with, and, someone that killed for him to keep him safe.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to be unpacked there.
Tamlin definitely has a lot of reflection to do, for sure.
He needs to look in that pool of Starlight a little bit.
He does.
Look
Maybe
at
he
his
needs
face.
to drink a little bit of it.
Maybe.
Yeah.
If anyone has a pool of Starlight that works better than antidepressants, I can tell you, I'll give you my
Call me
address.
up.
There were a few things in that conversation with Feyre and Tamlin that I wrote down that I just thought were really interesting. The whole, I'd let him erase me. That's basically what happens in book 2, right? Tamlin's trying to erase her and make her into what
he wants.
Right, exactly. She grabs the rose and is being stabbed by the thorns. Title alert: Court of Thorns and Roses.
Also, you know what song I started thinking of, Mindy?
Every rose has its thorn.
My two soulmates sitting with me right here.
So she said, I ignored the pain, and I wrote down metaphor for their entire relationship.
Oh, true.
Right? She ignores the pain because there's something beautiful in there too, right? And that's kind of what we're talking about with Tamlin in general, right? There's not all good, not all bad. There's both, right? But for Feyre, she ignored, and the readers too, we ignore some of the issues that there are. I loved the don't feel bad for what Tamlin says to Feyre, don't feel bad for one moment about doing what brings you joy. I said, that sounds like more when she goes to night court in book 2, and she almost word for word says that exact same thing. You do what you need, you do what you love.
But aren't we told all the time, especially as women, that if you are not sacrificing yourself, you are not doing the right thing? So the you do you mentality it feels very guilt ridden in our society, right? And even to Feyre, in terms of you work on yourself and you get better, because all of these promises she's kept are not around making herself better.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's ultimately why she does struggle so much in the beginning of living in the night court, is because she feels selfish. And she feels selfish here. We've already talked about that, right? You're feeling better, you're eating. There is this pressure in society that if you are not burning the candle at both ends, you are not trying hard enough. If you're not losing sleep, if you're not on antidepressants, if you're not, the fucking head of the PTA, and no offense to my friend that I know that listens to this, because she's a great head of the PTA, but if you're not doing all of those things, you are not doing
You're
enough.
failing.
Oh, I definitely fell into that trap.
Absolutely.
I was the president of the PTA. I was at my kids' school all the time. I felt like that's what I needed to
But
do.
again, why are we not focused more on it's a spread of 50 people and not just women?
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but I got real excited about it.
Well,
I totally agree,
I
though.
think you were thinking about not feeling free to do what brings you joy because of expectations
Well,
on you.
and how many, and Whitney, you have much younger kids than Mindy and I do, but there is a freeing moment when your children can be at home by themselves and you're like, I'm going to go do what I want to do. And Mindy and I have always done that.
Yeah.
But we've always been given shit about it.
I remember the exact moment, though, that we left our kids for the first time. It was actually to go see our lovely podcast editor's first podcast that I know of, at least the first one that I listened to, in a live in-person podcast of
That
Ice
was
Cream
the first
Headache.
time you left your kids
That's
at
the
home?
first time we left our kids at home by themselves because Val was old enough.
Wow. I
remember
that.
the moment. Yeah.
But I remember.
Because it's so freeing.
It is. But I remember having my son, and I had gone, and this person did not mean this in this way, and I don't think they'll ever listen to this, but if you do, I know that you didn't mean it this way, but I went to this night craft thing with Mindy, and someone said oh my gosh, you just had a baby. And I was like, yeah. And they said, where's the baby? And I said, at home. And they said, well, what's it eating? And I said, a bottle. But that person didn't know I don't produce breast milk.
Yeah.
I had an extreme amount of guilt over it. I felt bad for being there. I needed to be there in that moment. But like there is this pressure of like, again, especially if you're a woman, you are going to take care of those around you until they die and you can focus on yourself, or they grow up, or your husband's no longer present or whatever, and then you can do you. But like there's no focus.
But by then you're so burnt out, and so like you can't even.
Right. So I mean, again, like Feyre is not even like a mom or a spouse or any of those things. And I'm not saying that someone that's not married with kids can't feel those things, because you definitely can. I'm saying that she felt that societal pressure to like be a part of this bigger picture, when really she could not be her best person until she worked on herself.
Yeah.
I just thought it was interesting because I don't remember Tamlin ever saying this or anything like it. And it's just so interesting to me, like the journey that their relationship takes, right? Because he's starting off here, don't feel bad about what brings you joy. And then later he's like, you do what I want you to do.
Exactly.
I just thought that was interesting. A couple of things that I wrote down too that it struck me. Tamlin tells Feyre he is motivated. She's like, why are you doing all this nice stuff for me? And he says that he is motivated by her humanity, not her.
Yeah.
Not her humanity. He says, I'm drawn to it.
Your humanity's so cute.
Right. Like it just struck me. I'm not drawn to you. I'm drawn to it. Right. I just thought that was interesting.
That's a product of him feeling guilty about what his dad did to humans.
I think so too. Yeah, I think so too. But I just wonder how much that plays into his feelings for her.
He's not seeing her as a person. He's seeing her as a construct.
Well, and I wonder too how much he's seeing her as a reaction against his dad.
Yeah.
That he just like rejecting Amarantha, right? Lucian is slumming it, so to speak, like not being with High Fae, and here's Tamlin with an opportunity to be with a human, like his dad would be rolling over in his grave or whatever.
The last big F you to his dad.
Yeah. Feyre says, I don't remember, I didn't write down the context of this, but she says it would be impossible for me to ever forget what he was capable of. And that struck me because that's the opposite of Rhysand. Like there are multiple times where Feyre says like, I forgot, like this power. And when they go to the High Lords meeting in book 3, he steals Tamlin's voice and like causes him to stop talking. Yeah. And she's like, so I think they forget that he's the most powerful of all of them. And they're going to remember today, and I just thought it was interesting. Like Rhysand is so charming that people forget how powerful he is.
Acts like a prostitute on his lap.
Wouldn't you have?
We're saying that's sexy, but when you break it down,
here's the thing though, he didn't make her.
That is true.
And I think that's a big difference, right?
Yeah,
he says,
for
if
sure.
you don't want to do this, and
he always gives her the choice.
And I will say the only reason I know this, I'm about to have like a Whitneyism of remembering something. Part of my nerdiest thing of this week, and I'll go ahead and say it, is that I got the page overlays for Throne of Roses and Mist and Fury this week, and wanted to read the couple of pages around each overlay. And that scene in the Court of Nightmares where she's on his lap is one of the scenes. Mm-hmm. And she even talks about how wet she's getting over him like rubbing his hand up her thigh. Sorry, Whitney, that is what happens. She gets wet. I'm going to say it again. No, I'm kidding. So he even tells her it's a natural reaction. Don't worry about it. Even though she talks about how like hard he is behind her and how much he's enjoying it like she is, but like he even gives her the out, like you're not doing anything wrong, like it's okay, like so I think that's it's fucked up, but
definitely
he
a
does
big
tell
difference.
her she doesn't have to
no
do
he's
it.
Always gives her a choice. Believe me,
he does it under the mountain too, and
he does.
We'll get there.
And she doesn't really have a choice there,
right?
No, and I will say that's messed up.
So then we get to, I wrote it in all caps, the limerick.
Okay, can I just say, for the love of God, I don't need a bonus chapter. I need a bonus one pager of this 5th filthy.
Yeah,
like I want to know what it
was
is.
How come we didn't read the dirty limericks? Sarah J. Maas, where is our threesome that you took out of the 5th book? And where are the 3 dirty limericks? Here's the thing. That's a good, 50 pages that you could sell for $50.99 each through the publisher, and we would all buy it.
The
3
whole
limericks.
fandom would buy that.
Right. 3 limericks and a threesome. That's all we need.
The first time I read this, I was so charmed by the limerick and thought it was so funny. And he makes her laugh, which is great because that's a big sign of her healing, right? But once I realized oh my gosh, he wrote her these limericks and never freaking taught her how to read. What the crap is that about? I mean, it wasn't even the second time I read it. It was the 4th or 5th time that I read this book that I was oh my gosh, he never teaches her how to read. What is that?
It goes back to that whole women don't need to know how to read.
She doesn't need to, right?
She is a placeholder. She is there to be, essentially a consort, right?
But even in book 2, when they're planning on getting married, Rhysand says, you need to learn how to read as the wife of a high lord. You're going to be expected to do these things. And I'm does Tamlin not expect her to do these things?
See, I don't think that's something that
Tamlin would have had her do.
I don't think the Spring Court,
maybe that's true.
To Deb's point, does that. That's not something. And I agree with you. I think first reread, oh, it's so cute. On my second reread, oh, he's such an asshole for doing that. He's basically making fun of her. And now, as I'm really picking it apart, he talks about how he learned how to do that in the warband, where there's no social graces. He is literally using his only bag of tricks.
Yeah, that's true.
To woo her. I think he thinks he's being charming. I think.
Well, she thinks he's being charming.
Right.
It is charming.
Right.
On first glance.
But he does, I don't believe for a second that he's trying to manipulate her in that way. I think he's literally using what little skills he has in his arsenal.
I don't think he's trying to manipulate her at all. I don't have a problem with the limerick in and of itself. It's just the fact that the limerick is all he does.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Write the limericks, but also teach her how to read.
Shouldn't your spouse?
But I don't even think it crossed his mind.
Right. Which is to your point. He doesn't really know how to love because your spouse should want you to be the best that you can be. And, the best that you can be also changes over time. So if he's not willing to help her learn to read right now, what if she needs something later?
Well, and she does. She needs to know how to read when she goes under the mountain.
Yeah, she sure does.
Oh, yeah.
And so he totally,
And he doesn't help her there either.
No. He didn't help anybody there. He totally checks out.
We'll get there.
I mean, this book is really good, you guys.
It is.
It really is. So he talks to her about the mating bond because he's telling her that his parents were mates and that's where this garden came from. I actually think it's really important that she learned what the mating bond is from Tamlin and not Rhysand.
Yeah, I do too.
Because I think it would have come across as manipulative if she had learned that from Rhysand.
I wrote down foreshadowing because he says if you find your mate, the bond is so deep that marriage is insignificant in comparison. And I wrote Tamlin on this episode of That Didn't Age Well.
Yeah, wah, wah. Yeah, that's very accurate. And I just wrote down a couple of questions too while I was reading that section. How long were Rhysand and Tamlin high lords before Amarantha showed up? I don't think there's a way to figure that out. We don't get enough information, but I'm just curious because they both became high lords at the same time. Tamlin killed Rhysand's dad right after Rhysand's dad killed Tamlin's dad.
Right, it was a reaction.
And they both became High Lord at the same time.
True.
And Rhysand ran away, which I think is hilarious. But they became High Lord at the exact same time. But the way that they function as High Lords, I constantly forget that Rhysand hasn't been High Lord way longer than Tamlin because it seems like he has. And I'm just curious, how long
Rhysand
were they actually
had a better model.
Well, that's true. He had
And
better training.
Rhysand was groomed for that too.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, that was again.
That's
We
true.
go back to Rhysand was taught social graces and manners of the court and how to be it, and he had a great role model.
Yeah.
Tamlin spent all his time with dirty old soldiers, and his dad was a fucking asshole. So like, it begs nature versus nurture a little bit.
I did write down Feyre compliments Tamlin because he's, you're a great high lord because you're keeping your court safe from the blight. And I wrote down, yikes.
So I wrote, it's funny that you say that because I wrote, not true. Because she says, you've kept these lands protected from the blight when it seems that others haven't fared so well. They're idiots. And that's where I wrote, not true.
I mean,
well, how does she even know? She doesn't know what the other courts how they fared.
Well, he talks about how the whole land is going down, though.
I know, but like, she doesn't know that the other courts aren't doing the best they can to take care of their. I mean, she's like,
that's true.
Like, I'm like, you might have.
You know what assuming does, Feyre.
But doesn't he talk about how the lesser fairies are coming on his land because the other courts can't keep them in check?
Oh, that is true. He does tell her that. Yeah. So
which is true because none of them
they're not
have
there.
Right.
Yeah.
None of them have authoritative power.
Right. The High Lord's all gone.
Yeah, it's crazy how that happens.
Right. And so then we go to the all-important conversation that Tamlin and Lucien have with the Adder.
Hold on. Can we talk about Callan Mai first?
Oh.
I'm going to say Callan Mai.
Yes.
I have to. I wanted to point out that, number one, she's not invited. She asks to be invited, and he tells her no. And she says, why? And he said, there's a ritual, but it's very fairy.
I know.
Yeah.
And I just wrote 6. And I'm like, so he doesn't want you there because he's going to fuck someone, which, again, is a big thing that happens. I'm assuming it's going to be next week's episode.
It's next week,
okay.
Yeah.
That happens that you're like, oh, but then later you're like, ew. And I've already talked about this in a previous episode, so I can't wait to discuss it more. But like,
we'll get there.
He, like, again, he couldn't have just told her like there's a sexual.
I know,
but he tells her he tells her it's for her safety, and he says, "I'll reveal everything to you when it's more safe for you."
My husband's never kept me safe by fucking someone.
No, I agree.
Well,
I think we're focusing on that, but I think in general, because there's gonna be other fairies from other lands there. He probably can't glamour them all because there's too many. Again, I feel like he's coming from a place of
a good place,
a good intentions. I'm not saying it's a good place because it's still very controlling.
So Feyre overhears this conversation. Tamlin is like, go hide immediately. He does not send her away. He does not tell her to run.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting.
He just tells her to hide.
He's going to protect her from other hot fae, but there's an adder that can literally eat you, but just hide behind that bush.
Over here.
Right? Which we learn later, or I guess maybe we can infer or assume, he wants her to hear this conversation, right? He wants her to have as much information as she possibly can. And we find out later that she actually gets some really vital information from listening to this conversation. It just doesn't make any sense to her in the moment.
It doesn't make any sense to me in the moment. I have so many questions.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, I don't remember how any of this connects.
There's a part that like bothered me after I read it for several hours.
Tell me.
It's the part where she says that when she heard the adder speaking, it said, inside that hissing voice, I heard the screams of human victims. And I'm like, that's terrifying. Like, you forget as a reader how violent these books are. Again, to the point that my daughter's, when she read the first, or I guess technically the second Throne of Glass book, the one that's technically called Throne of Glass, she's like, oh my God, Mom, these are violent. And I'm like, they are?
Yeah.
I'm thinking not compared to the rest of this stuff.
And then she goes on and says the pleading of young maidens whose chests had been split open on sacrificial altars. I wrote, this is a reminder of why the adder makes me want to piss my pants.
I was just about to say, I would have pissed myself.
Yes.
The adder would have been like, small pee? What is that?
So what questions do you have, Minnie?
Okay, so I wrote, this conversation is perplexing to me. Probably not to Whitney, though.
Probably not to Whitney.
I wrote that because I can't, for some reason in my mind, I can't connect these things. So what is Tamlin's continued behavior, quote, that is garnering interest at Amaranth's court?
We both went,
You
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, you go ahead, Deb.
Well, I was just going to say, I've said from the beginning that there's definitely spies within Tamlin's court, right, that are telling Amarantha that.
So it's this him wooing her.
I definitely feel like that because Amarantha knows way too much and keeps, putting things on his doorstep and doing things to try to scare him because she's so close to the 50 years curse being up. She has zero reason to push it at this point.
Yeah, I think too, they could be talking about how he's still trying to protect his lands, going out all the time
instead
and
of just giving it,
killing all these lesser fae creature things. Because I'm still not sure that they know that Feyre is there, because I feel like Amarantha would just come and steal her away immediately. But the biggest thing in this conversation, sorry, what other questions did you have?
I have several.
Okay, let's
so
go
maybe
through
this will
them.
come up.
Yeah, let's go through
So
them.
why doesn't Amarantha know why the Naga are dead? He says something like she wants to know why there's 4 Naga dead on, like, isn't she the one sending these shitheads over?
I think that's connected to the continued behavior thing, because it's like, why are you going out here and killing our people? Like, what's the point of protecting your lands? You're gonna lose.
Okay.
But to your point, that's why I think she knows something's going on. Because why would he be so...
I think that's why I think she does think something is going on, but I don't think she thinks there's a human girl in Spring
wouldn't
Court.
the Adder go back and... Well, I guess the Adder didn't see her.
The Adder
Never
didn't know.
mind.
Yeah, the Adder didn't know
Good
she
writing,
was there.
Sarah Jane.
You've got us again.
Damn you.
And then the Adder says something about Tamlin sent his warriors, and what did he send his warriors to do? And
I think going over the wall to look for a human girl that fit the bill.
okay, see, I was going the other way. I thought she was wondering why he was sending the warriors towards her land. So you're talking.
No,
Okay,
I
so
think-
that's where I was confused there.
I think she's talking about sending them to the
And then
over the wall.
finally, he talks about Tamlin yells at him for using the cave, and why should no one be in it? Is that the pathway from under the mountain to the other courts that they use? Okay.
Under the mountain before Amarantha used to be kind of like the neutral site for High Lords. So like if they were going to have a High Lord meeting, they would have had it under the mountain. And so all of the courts have a cave and a tunnel pathway or whatever from their lands into under the mountain.
So Tamlin's saying you shouldn't be using the pathway to my courts because it's
Yes.
neutral territory.
But I also think that they're trying to give Feyre information.
Okay, that's what I was
So, like, Tamlin is really putting Feyre at risk for the benefit, the potential payoff later of her having information that she could use for their advantage.
But he wants to keep her safe.
Well, I wrote down. So he's putting her at risk. I said, is this really different than Rhys under the mountain, or Rhys sending her to the Weaver of the Woods?
It's not.
It's not.
But Rhys never talks about how he's trying to keep her safe when he does these things.
Well, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I know. I'm
It's
sorry.
just a question.
This is why best friends can do a podcast though, because I'm like, no, Whitney. No, my thing though is that Tamlin, every fucked up thing that he does is because he says he's trying to keep her
Protect
safe,
her.
and then
Yeah.
he's like, well, she's probably gonna need to come rescue us, so here's some info.
In this conversation, she gets a little bit of information about Under the Mountain, about the connection to Under the Mountain from the lands, which she later uses when she comes back to the Spring Court to like claim Tamlin or
Right.
whatever. That's how she gets there.
Do you guys remember in Wayne's World whenever well, and he goes backstage and like Frankie Sharp's limo is standing there and Chris Farley's there and he's like, thank goodness this guy was here to give me all this information. I feel like the Adder is Chris Farley.
That's not, you're not wrong.
Really the only point of and here's the thing, there's nothing wrong with that. Like we have to have informative things, but it continues to be a discrepancy on like Tamlin's character flaws.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
Who he
Well,
is.
I feel like this is one of the most clear, I'm doing this because I need you to save us.
Yeah.
And not the muddled, like, I need you to save me, but
why
I also
lock
care
her-
about you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
If you were depending on her to save your ass, why do you think she needs to be locked up?
The biggest piece of information or the biggest potential payoff that they have in this conversation is the Adder says to Tamlin that he has something about his heart of stone. You know, for somebody with a heart of stone, I can't remember what the rest of it is,
Yeah, I
but it's
know what you're
something.
talking
Because a couple of times people say this to him. That is the biggest piece of information that they really want Feyre to hear. And I just really liked how as soon as the adder leaves, Lucien is like, "What did you hear?" And I remember reading this at first, the first time that I read it, reading it like he didn't want her to hear anything. But then, this time I read it and I'm like, no, they want her to hear very specific things. So what did you hear?
Yeah.
Because I can't say, make sure you think about this, that, or whatever that you
Because
heard.
that's part of the curse, right?
Yes.
Well, and I just realized that's the first time we hear that.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll be honest,
It's not the last.
No, but it is the first.
I don't feel like as a reader that it's super clear that Tamlin is cursed against saying anything.
No,
Not at
it's
this
not.
point, especially.
I don't think that really helps with the way that people feel about Tamlin either,
Yeah.
because it could just be like, look, you're the fated one. You're going to
Right.
fuck some stuff up. I need you to come under this mountain. I'm desperate. We have a day left.
We get told very specifically that they're all like cursed or glamored or whatever against talking about it.
Alice, I think, reveals
Alice,
that to us.
when Alice is like, here's the whole situation. But no, I agree with you. It's really weird. The first time you're reading this, and from Feyre's point of view, this whole like conversation with this adder is like,
Well, and
it's
she
very
even says,
confusing.
he's like, "What did you hear?" And she said, "Nothing. I understood."
Yeah,
Like,
it didn't make any sense to me at all. Yeah.
Well, and by the time you get to the point where Alice is explaining it, you already are so pissed off. You can't really see the reason. Because, I mean, I'm telling you, as someone that's read this several times, I don't think I ever caught on to the fact that he was cursed against saying anything.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I wrote down, or one last thing, I guess, that I wrote down too, after this whole conversation, he, has Feyre say what she heard, and it's probably very disappointing for him, honestly, for her to be like, I don't
know.
nothing.
Yeah.
I wrote down that he retreats and isolates because he's like pissed that the adder was there, that he's in this situation, whatever. He's mad, and he just retreats and he isolates, and it's like that is what he does all the time. Like you were saying earlier, he's not growing out of any of his flaws, right?
Yeah.
This retreating and isolating when he's angry is just what he does all the time. That's just Tamlin. I feel like we talked for 2.5 hours.
Just 2 hours and 6 minutes.
Oh, I wasn't that far off. Let's talk about our nerdiest thing of the week. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. For my nerdiest thing this week, again, I work in a library. I work in a school library. And I was tasked with something that I got way too excited about. I do love to create, and I have been in a creative slump lately. And so when my librarian asked me to create a wall display for the book Room on a Broom, which if you haven't read it, is very cute, that she's reading to the kindergartners. And so we're doing inference, and they're drawing their own characters to add to the broom. So she wanted me to make a gigantic long broom and then put the main characters, the witch and the cat, on it, and then have this like extremely long broom where the kids could add their characters to. And I got super stoked about this, and I literally spent probably 2 days worth of planning periods creating this 3-dimensional broom, and like I paper pieced the witch and the cat, and I'll just have to take a picture and maybe post that on Instagram. But
That sounds
We'll also
fun.
tag the author in the book.
oh
on
yeah,
Instagram too.
and I wish I remembered the author, but it's such a cute little book. But I will definitely do that. But anyway, so I got way too excited about that.
That's fun.
Do you want me to go next since I have like 5?
Oh gosh, sure.
Yeah, it's like episode 1 again.
Uh,
Okay, so I have several. Number 1 being our nerdiest cocktail of the week, which we called the Glen Sour. It's delicious, and I know everyone's coming off of Thanksgiving, so this could be a good, I've just dealt with a bunch of shit at my family home. I'm going to have a delicious cocktail type of drink. It is posted to our Instagram and is also in our linked tree. Get all the recipes there of our cocktails. So one thing I also did was I ordered Scarlett St. Clair, who wrote the Hades and Persephone's Touch of Darkness series. series, but also wrote a book that Whitney and I are obsessed with called The King of Battle and Blood. There is a sequel of that book coming out on December 20th called The Queen of Myth and Monsters. And she's doing a really cool thing, the author is, where there are exclusive signed copies in indie bookstores across the country. So you can pre-order it through those, which is really, really cool. So I immediately text messaged Whitney and I was like, you want one of these, right? Because I'm getting one.
And I said, yes.
Yes. So the characters are Adrian and Isolde. It's a really, really great vampire story, which I'm a sucker for, if you get my drift. Okay, so I also got my Court of Thorns and Roses and my Court of Mist and Fury overlays this week from a reading portal, and literally fucking teared up as I was putting them in the books because I read like the couple of pages around
They're
each
really
overlay.
pretty.
They're beautiful, and immediately went, when I am quote unquote rereading something, I like to listen to it. So I went and put A Court of Mist and Fury on hold at the library so I can listen to it again. And then my last one is I just finished an illustration for Christmas of Resand. I'm calling it my Resand Very Cheeky Christmas print, which I will post and you will see why. So we'll leave it at that. Mindy and Whitney are always my critiquers and telling me, you know, what I need to change or what I need to keep. And so they're giggling because they know what it is, but it's a Christmas present to Feyre. We'll leave it there.
Yeah.
It's really good.
Very good.
It made me giggle. Okay, I have two nerdiest things.
Not five? What's wrong with you?
No, they're both really nerdy though. So the first one is that I read a fanfic of A Court of Mist and Fury. It ended before the actual end of the novel though, and I was kind of disappointed about that. But it was really good. It was a Resand's POV for Court of Mist and Fury. It was good. I can't remember. AO3 Archive of Our Own is the website, and I think Illyrian Tremors was the username of the person that wrote it.
And I tried to look them up on Instagram and couldn't find them to tag.
The book, I think it's just Akomaf Resand POV. It's on Goodreads. I just added it to my
because
read
I was
list.
looking for the authors, and so I thought I saw that it was Illyrian Tremors, but they don't have an Instagram account that we know of. So if you do, please message us.
I think it might be like a pseudonym, anonymous situation. I don't know, but
You mean that's not someone's name?
I know. I mean, like they don't want to be known as like that brand. Do you know what I mean? Well,
I know.
That's my arrogance coming out.
my second nerdiest thing is probably the most nerdiest. So the new Taylor Swift album came out recently, and it's really good. And all over my TikTok feed are people listening, you know, playing pieces of the songs. And they're like, this is for, you know, this is Nesta's song. This is Resand's song. And so I was listening to the songs like, yes, I totally see how people think that Taylor Swift is a Akatar fan. But there's this one song, I was listening to it on the way here and started crying in my car because it made me think of Selena Sardathian and Sam
Cortland.
Aww. Yeah. And it's a song that basically, it's called Bigger Than the Whole Sky. And it's like, I thought that you were going to be my forever and like I lost you.
You're going to message this to my daughter, right?
Oh, that's what I was working on. That was the TikTok that I was making was all the fan art and like that clip of the song. But it's just a sentiment that I feel like if you've ever lost a relationship, even if it's not like, you know, death, like in Throne of Glass, but it's a sentiment that you can relate to. It's really, I literally
That's
cried
really
in my
sweet,
car.
Whit.
Sweet.
It
Now,
was.
tell everyone what you listen to amp yourself back up.
It was still the Taylor Swift album, but it was
That's not normally what it
Karma. Karma is a good one, and Vigilante Shit is a good one too. Get
I
you
know.
back up.
She cusses a lot more on this album.
I know. I guess late at night when she writes songs, she just lets it all loose.
She's a grown up now.
She is, yeah. So next week, we will be talking about chapters 20 and 21, where Resand finally shows up.
Thank God.
It's finally here. And that's it. Thanks for listening.
Goodbye, everybody. For exclusive content and to keep up with all things nerdy, follow us on Instagram at Our Nerdiest Thing. We post book reviews, what to read next, and our cocktail recipes. Have something nerdy that you'd like to share? Email us at ournerdiestthing@gmail.com. This podcast is edited and produced by The Story Guides. Thanks for listening.